Welcome to our League of Women Voters of Massachusetts webinar. My name is Karen Price, and I co-chair with Lana Zamaro the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts Steering Committee for Environmental Action and Advocacy. This webinar is part of our Climate and Energy Solution Series. This is our first webinar using Zoom, so we are all getting used to it, and please bear with us. Three of us, Lana, our speaker, John Rogers, and I are the hosts, and we are able to speak and be heard. John will be speaking most of the time. His slides will be displayed along with a small box of him speaking, although right now, the small box has me in it. You can drag that small box to the upper right-hand corner or wherever you want so it doesn't interfere with the slides. Your controls are in a black bar at the bottom of the screen. If you move your mouse arrow to the bottom of the screen, you'll see raise hand and chat. We will use these to ask questions at the end, and I will go over the directions then. In the meantime, please don't raise your hand. You can use the chat to write to us if you need to communicate during the presentation without raising your hand. So let's get started. Our guest speaker is John Rogers from the Union of Concerned Scientists. John is co-author of the book Cooler, Smarter: Practical Steps to Low Carbon Living, which is the topic of this webinar. So now we will turn it over to John.
Great, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Lana. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. Happy to be talking with you all, particularly happy to be talking with you all about the solutions side of things. Obviously, there are a lot of issues that are facing us, a lot of things that can get us bogged down psychologically or otherwise. What I want to talk about today is good news about opportunity. So I want to talk about this book, Cooler, Smarter: Practical Steps for Low Carbon Living. Let me start just quickly with a word about the Union of Concerned Scientists. We are a member-based organization. We have 500,000 supporters across the US, including more than 20,000 in our science network. But the supporters in general come from all walks of life. So there are scientists and economists, engineers like me, and academics, researchers, but also just people who care about bringing science into decision-making. So we really work at the intersection of science and policy and help bring voices, scientists and scientific voices, in so that our policymakers are making decisions, the best decisions possible. So, and that includes on issues of monumental importance, from nuclear weapons proliferation to space security to food sustainability, but particularly on climate and energy. So I work in our climate and energy program on the solution side. So I want to talk very briefly about climate change. I think you all are on this webinar today because you get the science of climate change, even though some of our elected officials seem a little fuzzy on that. We're doing our best, but the science is simple. So we have a blanket around the Earth that keeps us warm. That's a good thing, because without it, life as we know it would not have been able to develop on the planet. So that blanket is composed of heat-trapping gases. So that's a good thing, except when we get too much of it. So when we put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, when we burn fossil fuels, for example, so the coal that we use to make electricity, or natural gas for electricity or for heating our homes and businesses, or oil for transporting, for our transportation sector, that puts carbon dioxide, other heat-trapping gases go up into the atmosphere, and that causes problems. And I think you all know the range of problems, from temperature increases to extreme weather to sea level rise to flooding to drought to spread of diseases, all sorts of things. That's all I'm going to say about the climate change piece of this, because I really do want to focus on the solution side, and that's what this book is about. What we were trying to do was take a scientific approach to understanding not the issue of climate science. I will say one of my co-authors is one of our climate scientists, and there is an early chapter in this book that's some of the clearest writing I've seen on what we know, how we know it, and what we think it means. But most of the book is about the solution side. And that's really where I want to focus our attention today. What I'm hoping is that you will come away from our hour together with a real sense of opportunity. So it's easy to get bogged down in climate change. It's easy to end up with a real sense of fatalism, of depression. I want you to come away with a sense of opportunity. So this book is really aimed at challenging, empowering, and inspiring people. So we say challenge because we lay out something we actually call the 20% challenge, which says wherever you are in your life, whether you are single and living in the city, living in a small apartment with a short commute, you walk to work, or if you live in the countryside, the suburbs with a big house and a long commute, whatever, we think that you can probably cut 20% off your carbon emissions in the near term. And the way we do that, so that's the challenge we lay out. We empower you with the knowledge of where the emissions are coming from in your own life so that you can actually focus on what's important. All of us are really busy. We've got a lot of things going on. What we want to do is make it easy by helping you to focus on what is likely to matter most. So we challenge, we empower, we inspire with stories in the book. So we populate it with real world people doing real world things that make a difference, that made a difference in their lives, and that might be applicable to your own life or might inspire you in your own life. And what the reason we call this Cooler Smarter, this approach Cooler Smarter, is because we're looking not just at the carbon emissions, so that's very important, and that's the CO2 you see on the cover of the book, but we're also looking for things that will save you money, or things that will cut your carbon footprint and allow you to live more healthily. So it's a 2-for-1, a twofer, or even a 3-fer. That's really what we're looking for, because that's going to make it easier for you to do it. It's going to make it easier for you to convince your family, your friends and family to go along, your uncle who may not quite get the science of climate change. If you can save money and at the same time cut your carbon, that's a win-win. So that's what we're looking for. So that's what the book is really about. What it's not about is Charlton Heston here, Moses. This is not a thou shalt book or a thou shalt not book. This really is a book about what you can do, not what you should do. So this is really about opportunity. And again, that's the sense that I want you to come away from this conversation with. So when we started looking, when we were thinking about writing this book, and we started looking around for what are people saying about how to address climate change in our own lives, we saw things like staying out of elevators or starting worm farms in your basement. Now, I often stay out of elevators. I like the exercise. I have a friend who has a worm farm in her basement. Those aren't necessarily bad things to do, but we're the Union of Concerned Scientists. We want to focus on, where do we get the most bang for our buck or for our brain power? And so what we did was use and this is all I'll say about the modeling side of this, but we had an input-output model that looked at the 500 different decisions we make as consumers every day, week, year, whatever, the decisions we're making, and we tried to figure out what the carbon implications of those were, and then sort of group them in categories so that we could understand them. And again, what we're interested in doing is focusing our attention, your attention, on where you're likely to get the most bang for your buck. So we're talking about things like insulating your attic, or deciding what you're going to eat, or thinking about going to the doctor, or remodeling your home. All these decisions we're making as consumers, which one of those really matter? So when you do that analysis, the first thing you find out, what does it all add up to? What do we as consumers, and I'm separating this out from certain government processes that aren't really part of our pie. But so this is the bulk of US emissions. When you add those up, what you find is that the average American emits something like 21 tons of carbon dioxide. It's a little lower now. This is since we did the research, we have been making progress. But let's stick with that number for a moment. So 21 tons of CO2. That's a hard number to get your mind around. I certainly can't picture it. So let me give you two ways to think about it. One is to think about, if you take the average car and you drive it all the way around the Earth, at the equator, you get wet. It's probably not good for your car, probably voids your warranty. But the other thing you do is you emit something like 21 tons of CO2. So that's one way to think of it. The other way is to look at that number and put it in the context of other countries. So it turns out to be something like 4 times the world average, but also 2 or 3 times the average for countries, people in countries that have standards of living very similar to ours. Now, each of us has our own characteristics, each country, and we know that the U.S., America, is exceptional in many ways. But if you look at that, so you've got to think that there might be some opportunity there. So when you see these figures, one reaction might be to hang your head in shame or hide your head. And I have bags. I sell bags, as a side business. If you want to go this route, I'd rather not. I'd rather see this as an opportunity and say this suggests that there's probably a little bit of fat in the system. That there are probably some opportunities, maybe 20%, maybe more, to change certain things, make some decisions that will serve us better from a carbon perspective. Again, if we know where to focus. So where do our CO2 emissions come from? Here's what it looks like when you take those data and you group them. The 3 largest categories: transportation, energy use at home, and food. So again, what and how you drive, how you use energy at home, and what you eat. The last category is something we, as the Union of Concerned Scientists, very scientifically call stuff we buy. That's a little bit more diffuse of a category. There are opportunities there, but I'm not going to focus on those. It's just a tougher thing to really zero in on. So if we focus on those other ones, so this is your pie chart. No, this isn't your pie chart. This is not one size fits all. There are going to be some of you who have transportation wedges that are much smaller because you don't even own a car. You do other things, other ways to get around, or you have made choices in the food department that really cut your carbon footprint. So take everything with a grain of salt. Adopt it if it fits your lifestyle, if it fits your example. Adapt it if it doesn't, and you can still make use of it, or throw it out, focus on other things. This is, I will speak in general about what we found on average, but you are not average, we know that. So, and remember, we're looking for opportunities to cut something like 20%, at least as a first cut. So with a 20% reduction, we're talking about something like 4 tons. So just so you keep that in mind as we go through some of the numbers. I'll come back to the numbers occasionally. So I want to go through some of these, each of these major categories, just quickly touch on them. It turns out that if you drive, the single most important thing you can do is probably to upgrade your car to one that gets better mileage. So, and the reason is we drive a lot. We Americans. So if you're looking at 12,000, 15,000 miles, so the average American drives, and we spend a lot of time in traffic. This isn't I-93, this is probably in California, but you've been there. You know something about this scene. So, and not everybody is in a position to upgrade your car now, but let me stick with this example a moment, just to put some numbers on this. If you go from a car that gets 20 miles per gallon to get one that gets 40 miles per gallon, and you drive the average amount, you cut something like 3.5 tons off your carbon footprint. So remember, we're looking for something like 4 tons in the near term. In one fell swoop, you can get most of it if you upgrade your car. So, but remember, what we're looking for are opportunities that serve multiple needs. So let's look at this from the perspective of gasoline. You over the lifetime of that car, you would save something like 4,500 gallons. At today's prices, you're looking at something above $10,000. So that's spread over the lifetime of the car. But what it does mean is that when you're the next time you're looking for a new car or a new used car, you're going to want to know how many passengers it can carry. You're going to want to know if you can fit your Chihuahua in the back seat. Most of them can do that, but what kind of carrying capacity, what kind of safety features, all that. What this does say, though, is that one of your criteria, you might do well from the long-term perspective to think heavily, to think hard about the fuel economy, because what we're looking for are opportunities to be cooler and smarter. So I mentioned that, certainly not all of us are going to be buying a car. My car is 17 years old. I'm hoping it's still got some life in it. In the meantime, there are a lot of things you can do that are, again, good for your carbon footprint and good for your wallet. So if you drive 55 instead of 65 or 75, if you keep your car tuned up, if you keep your tires inflated, if you leave the car at home, so if you think about carpooling or biking or taking public transportation, lots of things you can do that are, again, good from a carbon footprint, certainly good for your wallet, potentially good for your health, the walking, the biking, whatever. So this book, I mentioned we have real world people. I'll give one example. This is the former mayor of Ojai, California. Her name is Susa Francina. When she found out that half of all car trips were within 3 miles of home, she decided to leave the car at home whenever she could, to walk or bike or do it other ways. Now, I mentioned you want to take the examples in the book and apply to your own life what's relevant to your life. Turns out Ojai, California is a little sunnier than here, a little more opportunities to walk safely and comfortably. But it is an example, and we have lots of others throughout the book. So that's the first, that's transportation. If we look at energy use at home, I'll just touch, it's these two main categories, heating and cooling and electricity use for appliances and electronics. So I'll just give a couple examples, a few examples on opportunities or issues here. So one of them is that our homes turn out to be leaky. For the average American, something like 15 to 25% of the heat we're trying to keep in winter leaks out. And in summer, the reverse. That's like leaving a window open all year round. So if you're spending $1,000, $1,200 a year, you're talking of hundreds on your utility bills. You're talking of hundreds of dollars of potential savings for putting extra insulation in your attic or sealing around your doors and windows, finding other ways to keep your heat where you want it. One way to do that actually is to regulate your temperature with a programmable thermostat. It turns out to be really easy, really cheap. In Massachusetts, you can generally get rebates from your utilities. What this does is, dial it back during the middle of the day when you're at work, bring it up when you're coming home, dial it down at night, dial the heat down at night, bring it back up before you get up. So if you have one, if you install it, if you program it, you could be looking at saving something like 15% off your heating bills. If appliances, a big category, particularly if your appliances are older. The New York Times had something a few years ago that said, if your refrigerator is avocado, it's probably not green. Many of us will remember the 1970s color schemes of choice. We have made so much progress in terms of refrigerator efficiency in particular. I think there's something like 5 rounds of efficiency that have come in. So if your refrigerator is more than, certainly if it's from before 2003, but maybe even more recent than that, it might be cost effective and carbon effective to replace that. So another great thing for engineers like me is just looking at the numbers. So it turns out that just looking at your utility bills, maybe borrowing one of those meters if your library has it, to just check some of the appliances and see how much you're using, how that's comparing to, in your case of utility bill, how that compared to last year at this time, and trying to get some sense of how things compare to your past, to your neighbors. My utility actually has those on the, they'll send me a report every month that tells me how I'm doing. And if I'm doing really well, I get a smiley face. If I'm doing extra well, then I get a really big smiley face. So clearly they have some sociologists and psychologists knowing what motivates me. So just knowledge about power turns out to be powerful itself. And I'll give you an example. There was a utility in Arizona that did this a few years ago. Gave their customers these boxes, which made them two things: made them pay for their electricity up front, and that certainly has, the same way we pay for gasoline, that has an impact. But they also gave them real-time information about what their electricity was costing them. And just doing that with their 78,000 customers led to an average reduction of 12%. You can imagine that some of those people were extremely motivated by the environmental consequences of being more efficient, of changing out their light bulbs, of turning off things that they weren't using. You can also imagine that the smarter part, that the idea of saving money was a powerful motivator for people. So focusing on food, there's mostly one reason that's up there, and that's these little fellers. It turns out it takes 7 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of cow. That has enormous implications, and the way we tend to raise cattle in confined animal feeding operations with large manure lagoons has a lot of implications, not necessarily carbon dioxide, but methane, which is an even more powerful heat trapping gas. What it all adds up to is that a plate of meat has something like the emissions of 18 plates of pasta. Now, I told you this isn't a should book, so there is actually a box in there that says, should I become vegetarian or vegan? The answer is no, it's an opportunity. There may be other reasons to do that, but from a carbon perspective, this is an area of opportunity. If you're a big eater, if your family's a big are big meat eaters, turns out to be a real opportunity to cut your carbon emissions. So it could be about doing a meatless Monday. It could be about moving the meat from the center of your plate to the side of your plate. Thomas Jefferson actually was supposedly said that he always viewed meat as a condiment to his vegetables. He's big on his gardens there in Monticello. So here's another opportunity. If you're eating more whole grains, if you're eating more fish, if you're eating more fruit and vegetables, again, good for your carbon and good for your lifestyle, your health in this case. We're looking for those opportunities. Remember, this isn't just about us, but about the people who we are trying to inspire with our actions. So, and I mentioned this is that other category. This is things like recycling, like buying things or not buying things, or reusing, when to replace them. It's also things like buying insurance, going to the doctor. There are opportunities here to buy less and buy well, solid things so they last, but you're not going to make decisions about which emergency room to take your kid to based on which one has a lower carbon footprint. So opportunities a little bit more diffuse. So we talk a lot in the book. So the first 2/3 of the book actually focuses on each of these sections. We take each of those wedges section by section to try to help you understand what the issues and the opportunities are. If you've already done those, or once you get through that part of the book, the last third of the book is about where it goes from there, how this scales up. One way to think about how this scales up is you look at what's going on. This is a little building in New York City that obviously got an advanced copy of our book and did a lot of the stuff we talk about, replacing the windows, replacing the lights, adding insulation, all that, saving millions of dollars a year because of that. So was that just for the environment? No, you can imagine that makes it more attractive to tenants. It's a more comfortable space. It's cheaper, lower utility bills. So an opportunity for them to be cooler and smarter. Here's a little store, a little chain of stores that's doing a lot of things. Turns out to be one of the largest users of solar in the country, solar panels. Probably the largest, I'm not sure, largest supplier of energy efficient lighting. Are they doing that just to be green? No, you can imagine that there's some bottom line implications for them too. So 20%, we talk about this as being both meaningful and achievable. Achievable because we can show you the ways, the different parts, the different opportunities in your own life where you might find those cuts in ways that don't necessarily impact your lifestyle or may actually improve it. And meaningful because if we can get this to happen across the country with our friends, our families, our communities, our states, we'd be looking at something like shutting down, the equivalent of shutting down something like 1/3 of the coal plants in the country. So it's pretty powerful stuff. So how does that happen? It turns out it doesn't just happen. It happens. And again, the last third of the book is about where it goes from here. Once you've done it in your own life, because many of you, I'm guessing on this call, some of you on this call are low carbon leaders. You've been saying, yeah, I already do that. I already changed out my light bulbs. I don't eat much meat, all that. And that's great. That's terrific. There are opportunities to go beyond that. There are, the technology continues to evolve. But there are also opportunities to talk to your family members about this, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, take it to work, take it to your church, your synagogue, or your mosque. There are real opportunities, and particularly taking it to your elected leaders, because this conversation has all been about what we do as consumers. That's sort of the bottom-up approach. There has to be also this top-down. We need support from the government in doing this. So this is where the should comes back into the equation, because you can go to your elected leader and say, this is what I've done in my own life. You should make it easier for other people to do it in their lives. Here's what I care about. You should care about it too, because we are going to need that. We're going to need the action at the level of city councils and mayors, at the levels of governors and state legislatures, at the level of Congress and the White House. And goodness knows, some of those places need the encouragement. So it really is about taking it to the next level, spreading the gospel about the opportunities, and again, pitching it as much as possible as opportunities. So Cooler, Smarter is only a book. If it can help you with that, that's great. It's got one of my co-authors, my lead co-author, is actually an author, and he's written some great stuff. This is a very readable book. It's got these boxes that pop out. It's got lots of charts. For those who are into the data, it's got the raw data in the back of the book. We've got a website that it's a little quiz that can get you sort of 20 ways to cut 20% in 20 days, to get on that path very quickly. So that's kind of fun. But it is just a book. So what I want to leave you with before we open it up to the Q&A, which I always find to be the most interesting part, is a sense of what's going on out there. This is the little boy there on the front stoop there. Was a classmate of my son's. They when I took the book to school, and then he took it home. He and his dad started reading this. They really got into it. So they did things like stripping off all the siding and putting insulation on their home and putting the siding back on, and solar panels on the roof, and changing out the light bulbs. You look at, this is my twin sister actually. When her car, their second car died, they planned to replace it. When I'd been talking to them about some of these issues, they decided to maybe wait till the end of summer to replace it. And then they made it through that first winter. They've now been without that second car for quite some time. So it's carpooling, it's biking, it's Lyft, Uber, that sort of thing, taking taxis, finding ways to make it work. What I hope the message from the book can help you do is maybe get off the beaten path, or get off we're sort of in this mindset that I've got to go somewhere, I've got to hop in my car and go there. Do you? Could you bike? Could you hitch a ride? Could you take public transportation? Could you combine it with another trip? Doing things differently from the way we've always done it is, there's a real powerful opportunity. I want to leave you with a sense of where we are in my sector. I'm a senior energy analyst. I've worked in clean energy for the last 27 years, something like that. And it's an amazing time for clean energy. If you look at solar panels, we're still waiting for the 2017 official results, but in 2016 alone, we added enough solar panels during that year to power 2 million American homes. We're likely to have done something similar in 2017. It's had year-on-year growth of close to 60%, year after year after year. There are some clouds on the horizon, thanks to our president and other things, but we think it's a temporary thing. If you look at, and that's at the large scale, that's at the scale of homes, so big systems in fields, systems on rooftops, all kinds of opportunities to get involved. Community solar, if you don't own your own roof, if you rent, there's still opportunities that I'm happy to talk about. If you look at wind power, another incredible success story. Now the cheapest option in parts of the country, bar none. Even old coal plants can't compete with wind power. Just the incredible progress we've been making. Again, for the last 8 or 10 years, year after year after year, just so much happening to make this technology more affordable, more approachable, all kinds of great stuff. Offshore wind, if you haven't been to Block Island lately in Rhode Island, it's worth a trip. It's worth even more to go out on a boat, as I got to do last fall, and look at the first offshore wind turbines anywhere in the Americas. So these went in a little over a year ago, and they are the first of many. So these are actually 5 turbines. You see 4 of them here. Powerful winds particularly off of Massachusetts, off of New England. An incredible resource that we're just now tapping. Europe's been doing it for 27 years. We are getting into the game. So Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, all kinds of stuff up and down the East Coast. The West Coast will follow. So all kinds of good stuff happening there. So let me just leave with a picture of my kids, just because I like to show them off. But let me leave you with this thought, that my children, and maybe yours too, or your grandchildren, are growing up in a world that is fundamentally different from the world that you and I grew up in. It's normal for my kids to see solar panels on rooftops as we drive around the Boston area. It is normal for them to see a wind turbine by the side of the road as we drive to church on Sunday. It is abnormal for them to see an incandescent bulb in a socket overhead. It is normal to have cars that get 30, 40, 50 miles per gallon, electric cars, all kinds of opportunities that weren't there 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, all kinds of opportunities that mean that we can make a choice, that we can make decisions as consumers that we can make a decision once, change that light bulb, buy that different car, put solar panels on our house, make a decision once that will serve us for many years going forward. So it's really a time of incredible opportunity. And I want to go to the Q&A, and I'll come back at the end with just a minute or two of closing remarks. So let me turn it back over to Karen, who will administer the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks very much. Okay, so it's time to take questions. A few are coming in on chat, and we have a hand raised. So I'm going to start with the written questions. The first one is on the issue of meat. There is a push around grass-fed pasteurized beef as less carbon intensive. Could you speak to that?
Sure, and that's a great point. So not all beef is created equally. Cows, depending on how they're raised, can have a much larger carbon or carbon equivalent footprint because of the methane, or a much lower one. So there's certainly opportunities. The Union of Concerned Scientists actually has a program on food and environment, and I invite you to go on that section of our website and look, and it will talk about some of those issues, because you're right. There are ways, if you love your meat, if that's not where you want to necessarily, if you want to look for reductions there that aren't reductions in your meat intake, there are certainly opportunities there. Thanks for that question.
All right, a question from Christine. If you are traveling across the country, is it more carbon efficient to drive your car or take a commercial airplane?
Another terrific question. So we actually have a program on vehicles, our Clean Vehicles Transportation Program, and they have a resource, it's a few years old now, but it's called Getting There Greener. And there's actually, in the book, there's actually I was looking at it just before this call, there's a chart on the different options. So it depends how many you are, it depends how far you're driving. So if it's one of you if it's 4 of you in an SUV, that could be better than 1 of you in a Prius. Airplanes, it depends. And even within that, there are ways to, if you fly coach instead of first class, you're responsible for fewer emissions because you're taking up less footprint of that airplane. You're making it easier for them to transport more people. If you fly direct rather than doing 1 or 2 stops, that also has positive implications. So I'd encourage you to look again on the Clean Vehicles section of our website, or in the book in Cooler Smarter for resources there. So again, it depends.
All right, I'm going to go to an oral question. This is a big leap for me.
Excellent.
Mary Adelstein has her name up, and I'm going to allow her to talk. Oh, sorry, Mary. You have an older version of Zoom, and
Oh,
you can't you can't ask a question. So please ask it in chat.
sorry, Mary. I'm here for you. I'm here.
So the next question is from Lana. Does signing on to green energy options with our utility as some percentage of our electricity, is that a useful action?
I'd say yes. So this is sometimes either through your utility, it doesn't have to be through your utility, other options. When a wind turbine like what you see on the screen, or actually I don't usually have a solar panel in my office, but I thought that would be a good backdrop. When renewable energy options, when renewable energy technologies produce electricity, we say they also produce some greenness. That is what differentiates them from a coal plant or a natural gas plant. And that greenness actually is it's a market mechanism, but it's how utilities show that they're complying with state mandates about how much renewable energy they have to have. It's also how the rest of us can drive renewable energy forward. If we buy those renewable energy credits, as they're called, if we take those off the table, that means that utility has to go find more somewhere else, which means somebody else has to put up another wind turbine or put up some more solar panels. So the more we can do to take those off the table and use them to green up our own electricity. And it's a simple thing. I mean, it's sort of a semantics, but it's more than semantics, because again, this is the market mechanism that utilities use to comply. And if we take it as a voluntary, on a voluntary basis for our house, for our business, whatever, that it's like musical chairs, and we've just taken one of the chairs away. And so you see companies, organizations, institutions doing this. You'll see universities, colleges and universities do this. You'll see banks, you'll see the US Navy, there are huge buyers of renewable energy credits out there. And again, what they're doing is driving more renewable energy. There are some caveats, it has to be good quality. You want to make sure that you're getting what you paid for and all that. But yes, green power is an easy, it's sort of a flick of a switch kind of thing to say, look, I used to get whatever power my utility was sending me. I'm still, I'll still get the electricity, but now I'm doing this green overlay on it that is driving renewable energy. So thank you, Lana.
Okay, and this one is from Catherine. What about using the power of the tides along ocean coasts? Is that being done anywhere?
Oh, that's beautiful. So ocean energy. So if you think tidal power, you can think about wave energy. You can think about water currents offshore. Those are all technologies that exist to some extent. I went to see if any of you have been in the Bay of Fundy, in Canada, between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. They have the largest tides in the world. So they have captured some of that in a tidal facility. We have small ones in this country. Still something we're working out, I think. Wave energy is the same, anything. You've got this up and down motion. There are all kinds of ways to harness that power. And it's really neat. And particularly, again, for a mechanical engineer like me, that's a whole lot more interesting than much as I love solar panels. It's really neat. It's a tough environment. It's a very caustic, the salt water does tough things to metal. But there are a lot of experiments, a lot of sort of even sort of mid-level projects that have gone on in Europe and elsewhere. So yeah, it's worth keeping an eye on.
All right, we're going to try another raised hand. This is Andrea. And Andrea, can you ask your question?
I think you might be muted, Andrea.
Did I mute Andrea?
Mute myself.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this will sound very small in comparison to some of the things you're talking about, but for those of us who like to cook, how much do you think switching to an induction cooktop versus for thermal efficiency versus a gas cooktop can really help towards our 20% reduction?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I keep wondering that because I did we remodeled our kitchen a few years ago. We put in an induction cooktop. So there are reasons to move to electricity. So efficiency is one thing. the other thing, and I think you'll see a lot more of this in the coming years, the idea is we can, natural gas, we don't really have alternative supplies of natural gas. I mean, there's fracked and there's non-fracked, but it's basically methane that we're pulling out of the ground and using. Whereas with electricity, we have all kinds of options for electricity. So oil, if you think about petroleum, oil is getting dirtier all the time. If we can switch to electricity for cars, that turns out to have immediate gains from an efficiency standpoint, from a cost standpoint, costs about a third as much per mile as an oil-based, a gasoline-based car. So anytime we can switch to electricity, there are likely to be some gains. I don't know about the relative efficiency of induction versus gas, but the point is that our electricity sector is getting cleaner all the time. And so whether it makes sense right now or not, it will make sense over the lifetime. I'm guessing it would make sense over the lifetime of that cooktop.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom has asked how, let's see, Ted has asked, how can one learn more about community solar and participate?
Oh, terrific question. Thanks for coming back to that, Ted, because I mentioned it in passing. So community solar is the notion that if you don't have a roof that's appropriate for solar because it faces the wrong way, because it needs reshingling, because it's got too much shade, because you don't own it, because you live in a multifamily, because you rent. So this is much of Massachusetts. There's still options for you to buy into solar. And the idea is you take these same solar panels, but instead of putting them on the roof, you get a bunch of them together and you put them in a field somewhere, say, and you orient them toward the sun and you tilt them optimally, and you get economies of scale because you put a whole bunch, you bought more, and you're operating them just like that. So, and then people can buy into that. So they can buy sort of the output from a set number of panels, or buy a certain amount of output each month. You can, and you lock this in for 15 or 20 years, or there are ones that are doing it much shorter now, community solar offerings that are much shorter. But the idea is you can get a piece of the solar action without having actually put solar panels on your roof. So I would suggest, not all states have community solar. Massachusetts does. There were changes in the law 2 years ago that made it less attractive than having it on your roof. We're trying to undo those changes, including because they hurt renters. And if you think about low or moderate income households that might want a piece of the solar action but can't buy their own, community solar is a powerful tool for that. So I would just Google community solar Massachusetts. There are a bunch of companies that are offering different things. Again, it's a way of getting a piece of the action without actually putting solar on your own roof.
Okay, thanks. Question from Tom. How effective are stretch building codes in reducing emissions?
So Tom is referring, thank you, Tom. Tom is referring to these building codes that are better than sort of the default that a lot of communities in Massachusetts, I wish mine had adopted it, but a lot of communities in Massachusetts have adopted it. And I don't know the numbers. I do know that energy efficiency is another area. When I give this talk in person, I hold up a light bulb. Let me just see if I have, oh, here we go. If you can see this on the camera, this is a light bulb. This is an LED light bulb. This is a technology that if you had wanted to buy an LED light bulb, as I did 7 years ago, I had to go on the internet, pay $40 and wait for it to arrive. We have made amazing progress on energy efficiency, including in the lighting department. And that's really important. There's an article out today in Vox, I think, that talks about how utilities are freaking out because, it used to be that your utility consumption would go up year after year after year, and utilities could count on this and investors could count on this. What's happened is that thanks to energy efficiency, we've seen this level out and even in some cases decrease. I mean, that's an amazing story. So stretch codes, building codes are a piece of that. We know we can build things better, and it's great to have communities that have said, yes, We get that these houses are going to be around, these buildings are going to be around for 50 years. We want them to be built right. So I think that's a powerful tool. It turns out that Massachusetts, in the annual rating from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, Massachusetts is #1 in energy efficiency policy, and actually has been #1 for the last 8 years, I think. So we're doing a lot of stuff right in Massachusetts. Even here, we have all kinds of opportunities to do even more. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Okay. Ted is asking a political question.
Uh-oh.
Is pressing the legislature, that's the Massachusetts legislature, to increase the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, an effective step versus other steps?
Oh, Ted, you have, this is a question very close to my heart. So one of the things I do during the day is try to figure out how to get states like Massachusetts to increase their renewable energy requirements. So the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or Renewable Electricity Standard, is this requirement that utilities get an increasing portion of their electricity from renewable energy each year. So right now we're at 13%. There are a lot of states that are requiring a whole lot more of their utilities. There are several states that are requiring now 50% by the year 2030. Hawaii is 100% by 2045. There is no reason why we shouldn't do 50% by 2030. So 50, again, require utilities by 2030 to get half of their electricity from renewable energy. So that is the #1 priority for UCS in terms of our energy work in Massachusetts, for a lot of our counterpart organizations, a lot of our collaborators, for our partners in industry, the solar industry, the wind industry. So that's, yes, we would love the legislature, and particularly the House of Representatives in Massachusetts is where we need a lot of should. They should be doing this, and please do push your elected representative to push the leadership to bring this up, because I know a lot of the representatives are with us on this. A lot of the Senate is with us on this, so it's really the leadership in the House.
Great. Okay, this one's from Dan. How much electricity can be saved by turning down the temperature of our hot water tanks?
That's a good question. So I don't know a specific stat. I will say it's good to turn it down. It's good not to turn it down too low. So I think something like 120 or 122 degrees is about as low as you want to go, just because of health reasons, what you'd be incubating below that level rather than killing off in your hot water. But that's a great opportunity there. Also, if you think about cooler and smarter, saving carbon, you're saving money, you're also protecting your health, because if your hot water tank is at 140 degrees, your kids can get burned much more quickly than at 122 degrees. So that may be a 3 for 1 there.
Okay, this is from a different Dan. Please tell me if my thinking is correct. When one buys community solar, he or she isn't playing keep away because community solar companies sell their energy to utilities. On the other hand, if you buy RECs from non-utilities like Mass Energy, you're playing keep away and bringing more renewable energy onto the grid. So it's a question of whether what he's thinking is correct.
Yeah, so right. So when you do community solar, you want to figure out what you're buying. You could be buying just the electricity output, and they could be selling the solar renewable energy credits, the SRECs, selling those to the utility. You're still helping make solar happen, but it's the utilities, it's sort of that solar requirement that they have that's driving the actual solar. So there are reasons to do it anyway. You're locking in your rates for the next 15 or 20 years if you go with that kind of agreement. So if you buy the electricity and the SRECs, that's much more expensive, but there is value. You're right that sort of holds together more. If you just go out and buy renewable energy credits, and they're good quality renewable energy credits, then yes, you're helping drive renewables. Is a little bit more clear, I think. So both of them can be good things to do. You want to look at the fine print. You want to figure out what it is you're buying.
Okay, I think this is going to be the last question. This is from Christine. Does it make sense to insulate your walls if your attic is leaky?
Everything helps. Your attic is going to be your highest priority. So if you can not just insulate it, but before you do that, but seal as much as you can up there, and then put good levels of insulation. So it turns out, and I have a recent, if you go on our blog and you look, I have a Game of Thrones blog post about winterization. Winter is here. Winter is coming. If you look on there, there's a link to the Department of Energy that tells you how much makes sense in climates like ours. It turns out to be something like 2 feet of insulation, actually. That's a hard thing to do, depending on how your attic is configured. I've done it in part of my attic, but not all over. So your attic is a higher priority. I do both if you can. Figure out ways to seal your attic, figure out ways to put more insulation there, and then figure out how to get insulation in the walls.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to Lana to wrap it up. Lana?
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. So we do need to wrap up now so John can make another commitment. And as promised, I want to, before we say our final adieus here, to ask John if he has any closing remarks.
Sure. As I said, this is just a book. It's a good read. It's an easy read. It's got a lot of good information in it. If it's useful to you, great. If not, I hope the webinar at least has given you some ideas of where to focus. If you remember nothing else, remember these 2 things. One, that it comes down to, for most of us, a carbon footprint comes down to what and how we drive, how we use energy at home, and what we eat. So that, on the one hand, that's one tidbit to squirrel away there. The other is that climate change is serious, and I think we see that in the headlines all the time. We see that in our own backyard often. We see that with what our friends and families and our neighbors in other countries are experiencing. We know that climate change is serious. What I want you to leave today with is understanding that we have serious responses to climate change. We've got the technologies, we've piloted, we've ground tested, ground truthed the policies that help drive these things. We know what to do. This is not, this is not the 14th century with the Black Death coming and people, dropping for unknown reasons. We know why climate change happens. We know how to address it. And so remember, think about that the next time you see a wind turbine, the next time you see solar panels on a roof or in a field, the next time you see a light bulb overhead that doesn't look like something that Thomas Edison would have been recognized from 1879. We understand the seriousness of climate change. We have serious responses. So thank you to LWV for the opportunity to share some of these messages with you. Please look at our website for more resources. Get in touch with me. I want you to be empowered. I want you to feel challenged, but also empowered and inspired. And I hope today has done that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. This has been a really informative and I think an important presentation. As you pointed out, we've got many, many choices. And I think your presentation has been a help in guiding us to what the most effective choices that we could make and see them as opportunities. That's a great way to think of it. I happen to own Cooler Smarter, and I would like to give it a thumbs up because it's written in real people speak. And again, it's just loaded with very useful information for us. So I want to also, on behalf of the League, thank all of you who joined us today for this webinar. And just want to mention that this is the first in our League's Environmental Action and Advocacy Committee series of our Climate and Energy Solutions series for the year. So please stay tuned for information about upcoming webinars that we'll be broadcasting through 2018. So thank you, John, once again, and all of you who logged on for today's webinar. Take care. See you next time.